Most WordPress people who go to events go to WordCamps, the official WordPress-related events. And honestly, I get it. I met 2,500 of them earlier this month in Krakow for WordCamp Europe 2026. WordCamps are wonderful events. I know that not just as someone who has attended many of them, but as someone who has initiated and co-founded WordCamp Europe and WordCamp Netherlands. And I have organized dozens of WordCamps for over the past 17 years. So when I say this, understand that it comes from a place of deep love for WordCamps. But WordCamps are not enough. Not if you are serious about building better WordPress projects. Not if you run an agency. Not if you run a WordPress or WooCommerce plugin company. And also not if you want to understand where the web is moving. If you want to keep leveling up how you think, how you build, how you sell, how you collaborate, and how you make decisions, you need more. You need more perspective. Because WordCamps are mostly WordPress rooms. Makes sense, right? And WordPress rooms are very valuable, but they are still WordPress rooms. That means the conversation usually starts from the perspective of WordPress, or plugins, or themes, or WordPress contributors, WordPress agencies, and obviously the types of clients you have as a WordPress agency. So occasionally there will be business models, and there's always going to be a lot of WordPress community-related stuff, and all of that matters, but WordPress does not exist in isolation. Your work does not exist in isolation either. You build for clients who care about outcomes. You build on top of hosting platforms for one, but you also work with checkout systems, payment providers, performance expectations. There's security requirements. There's obviously accessibility, but there's general legal requirements you have to work with. Your work lives within business constraints, and combine those with technical decisions that are not always going to be WordPress specific. And if the only events you are going to are WordPress events, you are only exposing yourself to part of the full context. And that's a bit of a problem, right? It's not that WordCamps are bad, again, far from it. It's that the problem is too many WordPress professionals stop right there. They stay inside the WordPress bubble. That bubble is very comfortable, I get it. You know the people, you know the language, you understand the references. You can walk into the hallway and, talk about, hooks, blocks, plugins, WordPress hosting, maybe even some community drama, and everybody will know what you mean. And that has a lot of value. But as you've probably heard before, comfort is not always where growth happens. Growth often happens when you're in a room where people look at the same problems from completely different angles. And that's why events like CloudFest, Checkout Summit, PressConf, and other focused web events matter. They give you a different room. With overlap, sure, but it is a different room. And that different room gives you different conversations. At CloudFest, for example, you are around hosting companies, infrastructure people, people from other CMSs. You have general product people, you have agencies of all kinds, you have the founders, the developers, and you have people building the systems that many WordPress sites depend on. Now, for instance, at Checkout Summit, the center of gravity is different again. We are still in the WordPress bubble, but we are specifically talking about WooCommerce. So you talk about conversion, you talk about payment flow, you talk about buying behavior, checkout friction, and everything that happens around the moment a visitor becomes a customer. The great thing about Checkout Summit, by the way, was that you were also talking directly to WooCommerce people and their heavy users. They are right among you. Now, there's another one I'd like to highlight. That's PressConf. And there, the focus shifts again. Again, in a sort of WordPress bubble, but it's a more intimate, more deliberate, and an event more centered around the actual business of WordPress, the culture, and with that, the future of the WordPress ecosystem. Now, these are just examples of different kinds of events, but each of these events give you a different lens. And that is my point. You don't go to these events because they replace WordCamps. That's not what you should be looking for. You go because they complete the picture. Because when you are always in the same room, the same type of room, you start hearing the same type of answers and the same type of conversations. And after a while, you may not notice what is missing anymore. And that's dangerous, especially if you are an agency owner, a senior developer, a product manager, or someone, making decisions that affect the real client projects that you're working on. Because the work you do sits at the intersection of a great many things. So let's list a couple of those many things, right? So we've got technology, we've got business, we've got user experience, we've got hosting, as mentioned before. We have e-commerce, we have performance, we have security, but also things like client communication, team workflow, and very, very important in the world of today, long-term decision making. WordPress is part of that. It's a very big part of that, but it's not the whole thing, right? And the more serious your work becomes, the more important it becomes to understand what is happening around WordPress. And that is the shift I think more WordPress builders and developers and agencies need to make. You should stop asking only what is happening in WordPress and, start asking what is happening around the web that will affect the way I build with WordPress. That question leads you to better rooms. It leads you to events where the conversations are not only about which plugins to use or which combination or what has changed in core or what the newest block editor feature does. All important stuff, but you need more than that. Those things matter. But outside the WordPress bubble, you also start hearing different questions. Questions like, how are agencies positioning themselves, right? So how does AI affect the job? Because it affects the job a lot and from a lot of different angles. How does AI affect the agency you're working for? What are hosting companies seeing across thousands of sites? What are product teams struggling with? Questions like, what do clients actually care about when they buy? And what does quality look like when projects become more complex? Those are very different questions. You want to know what the mistakes are that everyone keeps making, but nobody talks about inside their own ecosystem. Now, those are the types of conversations that sharpen you. Not because every conversation is going to give you an immediate answer. That'd be lovely. It'd be great if that was the case, but not very likely to happen for all questions. But these talks, these conversations, they give you much better and wider context. And better context changes how you think. It changes what you notice. It changes the questions you're going to ask after your first question, after you've understood the answer and before you make the decision related to it. It changes how you, evaluate tools. It changes how you talk to clients. It could change how you understand risk and how it changes and how that relates to the quality of the work that you produce. And over time, it will change the types of work that you are able to do. That is the part that is hard to explain until you've actually experienced it. There's a big difference between reading about something online and sitting at a table with the people who are dealing with the same level of complexity as you, but from a very different angle. Those angles matter so much because the developer looks at the build and an agency owner thinks about the client and the consequences. Those are very different angles. A hosting company, they will see patterns across lots of different sites. And if you have a product company, for instance, you look at adaptation, you look at support. Those are very, very different angles. Just like how someone closer to e-commerce or client strategy looks to the principle of conversion, trust, and business impact. They're roughly the same problem, but they're the same problem from completely different angles. And when you put all of those perspectives in the same room, you start seeing patterns you would not have seen from the inside of your own bubble. And that's it. That's where the learning happens. And yes, that part is not unique to these events. WordCamps have these too. I can hear you thinking this. But those happen in the hallway track. And anyone who's been to a good WordCamp knows that some of the most valuable moments happen outside of these scheduled talks, in the hallway during lunch, or in the questions after sessions, in the conversations you did not plan. So that part is not new. That's not what I'm referring to. The difference is the depth and the focus of the room. At a dedicated event, the hallway track starts from a specific point that is very much more already in the direction where you want to go. The people there are already gathered around a sharper topic, like a more defined topic. And because of that, the conversations tend to go deeper, faster. So you spend less time explaining the context. You spend less time finding the people who care about the same problem. And you spend more time getting into the parts of the conversation that actually change how you think. This is why I think these dedicated events are so important. Again, and I keep stressing this, but it's not because WordCamps do not have those conversations. They do. But because dedicated events create the conditions for those conversations, the learning conversations, to become more focused, more specific, and often much more useful for the kind of work you are trying to level up to. They are not just about consuming information. They're about changing your perspective. And for WordPress professionals in 2026, that matters now more than ever before, because WordPress has grown up. The ecosystem is no longer just hobby blogs, small business sites, and brochure sites. It's all that, sure, but now also their complex versions, and all of that, all of those related to those are in there as well. There's stuff that has to do with editorial workflows. There's enterprise projects. It's a high-stakes business infrastructure, often much more on the forefront. And if those projects have grown up, the way we learn needs to grow up as well. Now, again, that doesn't mean leaving WordCamps behind. I would never argue that. WordCamps absolutely matter. They are one of the best ways to connect with the WordPress community, and understanding, with that connecting and understanding what is happening inside the ecosystem. And, meet the lovely people who make WordPress what it is, as it is. But they should not be the only place you go to. If you only go to WordCamps, you mostly get WordPress-shaped input. And if your input is WordPress-shaped, you're thinking eventually it will only become WordPress-shaped too. Limiting. Because the best WordPress work often comes from people who understand more than WordPress. They understand the clients, business, users. They understand teams, but they also understand trade-offs outside of WordPress. They understand how decisions play out over time. They understand that the best answer is not always the WordPress native answer. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do as a WordPress professional is spend time in rooms that are not only about WordPress, and sometimes even not about WordPress at all. That is why CloudFest was valuable. That is why Checkout Summit was very interesting. And that is why the business and ecosystems related to conversations at PressConf mattered so much. And that is also why I have been thinking a lot about the kind of WordPress event I believe we need next. Because there is room for something that sits in between those worlds. An event that still understands WordPress deeply, but does not stay trapped inside the usual WordPress conversations. An event for people who want to talk about the work at a higher level. Not just the tools, not just the features or the community, but the decisions, the business, the quality of the work, the way agencies mature, the way builders level up, ultimately the way WordPress fits into the larger web. I wrote more about that on my blog, and I will link that post in the description below. So consider that a hint to check out, because I do think we need more spaces like that. More spaces where WordPress professionals are challenged to think wider. More spaces where agency owners, developers, product people, hosting company, e-commerce specialists, WooCommerce specialists, and serious builders can have the conversations that do not always fit neatly inside a traditional WordCamp. That is the larger point I want to make here. Go to WordCamps, please do, but also look outside of WordCamps. Look at all these different events out there. Look at events around hosting, events around e-commerce, maybe just performance. Performance Now is a good event to check out. look at product, look at business, and look at the wider web. Because if you want to build better WordPress projects, you need more than WordPress knowledge. You need perspective. And perspective comes from leaving the room you already know. And once you spend enough time in those different rooms, something interesting will start to happen. So the next time you are thinking about which events to attend, do not just ask, where are the WordPress people going? Ask, which room will make me better at the work that I actually do or want to do? And that answer might still be part of a WordCamp, but it might also be somewhere else. And I think more of us need to find those rooms. Once you start looking at WordPress work this way, you'll notice one mistake everywhere. People keep treating symptoms as if they are causes, and that mistake is expensive. It is why people replace hosting when the real problem is the build. It's why they add caching, at the end no less, when the real problem is the uncached work. It is why they install another plugin when the real problem is a business decision nobody made. And it is why a site can feel broken even when every single individual tool is doing exactly what it was configured to do. So in my next video, I want to show you the diagnostic shift that changes all of this perspective, all of this, I'm learning from the wider web around WordPress. Because once you can separate symptoms from causes, WordPress, in the larger web, those builds, they will stop feeling like a pile of random problems. It will become a system that you can actually reason about. So go click on that for the next video.